And the big question that we're asking is, where do these bacteria come up against this particular challenge to their survival? Where do they come up against these chemicals in their environment? Where does that happen? And a couple of you said, well, in our bodies. Yeah. We've said, how many of you have taken an antibiotic? Most of you have taken an antibiotic. And if you haven't taken an antibiotic internally, you've probably used an antibiotic. If you get a cut, do you put Neosporin on it? Neosporin is triple antibiotic ointment. It's got 3 different antibiotics in it. Kills the bacteria in and around the cut so that the cut heals without infection. So one of the places that bacteria come up against antibiotics is in our bodies. But does that mean that we shouldn't take antibiotics? Heck no. If I have a nasty bacterial lung infection, I'm taking an antibiotic. It could save my life. However, that said, we don't always use antibiotics appropriately. I'll read this, then I'll shut up. Causes of antibiotic resistance. Using antibiotics for non-bacterial infections. An antibiotic kills off any bacteria in the body that are sensitive to the antibiotic, even if the bacteria killed are not making the host sick. It leaves bacteria behind which are resistant. And all bacterial populations in the body become tougher and more resistant. Where did we say that you have populations of bacteria in your body? On your skin? In your guts? Up your nose? In your lungs? Actually, the better question would be, where don't you have populations of bacteria? And the answer is nowhere. Every square centimeter of you, inside, outside, upside, downside, backwards, and forwards, is covered in bacterial populations. It's kind of freaky, isn't it? It's okay. You're just a big planet walking around with all these little creatures clinging to you. You are their life support. Isn't that nice of you? When we apply antibiotics, just in general, when we apply antibiotics, they tend to kill all the bacteria they come in contact with. If there's a bacteria that's making us sick, they'll kill that. If there are bacteria in the same place as the one that's making us sick that aren't making us sick, they'll kill those too. Hence, diarrhea after an antibiotic, because you've killed a bunch of the bacteria in your gut, not just the ones in your system that were making you sick. Now, there are antibiotics that are targeted. Zithromax, Z-Paks, have saved me more times than I can count. They do very well with respiratory bacteria. There are other antibiotics that don't do so well with respiratory bacteria. If you have a bladder infection, you'll probably get a different antibiotic than you would if you have a really nasty sinus infection. If you have pink eye, my daughter had bacterial pink eye a couple years ago. That's a different antibiotic than a pediatrician would prescribe for a skin infection. So different antibiotics do target different bacteria, and we'll talk more about why they can target one and not the other. But a lot of bacteria don't just kill one species. A lot of antibiotics don't just kill one species of bacteria. They kill multiple species. So then they kill off the weak ones. Who's left when you're done with the antibiotics? The strong. The ones who can resist that antibiotic the next time. Taking antibiotics when you don't have a bacterial infection is one cause of antibiotic resistance. And what was the percentage of antibiotic prescriptions that they believe are inappropriate in this country? In the film? Half. Half of the prescribed antibiotics in this country are probably prescribed inappropriately. Ah! Whew. I love antibiotics. They have literally saved my life. I'm quite sure of it. If you have any kind of underlying condition that makes you more susceptible to infections, antibiotics can save your life. 200 years ago, I would have died, I'm quite sure, of some kind of respiratory infection. I probably wouldn't have made it out of childhood. I'm really thankful for antibiotics. That said, should you take an antibiotic when you have the flu? Let's talk about that very thing. So this is a little graphic that I picked up from the Mayo Clinic. And boy, it's fuzzy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna sort of write over this a little bit. So bacterial infections, things that are caused by bacteria. Strep throat. That's a bacterial infection. My daughter, we showed up at her third birthday pediatrician's appointment. You know, you get that annual appointment. And I said, yeah, she just feels a little warm to me this morning. It's supposed to be her well baby appointment where she got vaccinations and they took her temp. She was 103. Yeah, she had strep. That calls for an antibiotic, and that calls for an antibiotic right now. Untreated strep can lead to other complications. It can do damage to your heart. It can do damage to other organs in your body. You want to treat strep and you want to take an antibiotic that's going to kill the strep, period. You got strep throat, you should be on an antibiotic. Tuberculosis. What the heck is tuberculosis? I'm going to spell this wrong, I'm sure of it. Tuberculosis. Quite sure I spelled that wrong. That N part is highly suspect. Tuberculosis is a bacterial infection of the lungs. TB. TB is a slow-growing bacterial infection of the lungs. 100 years, people in old literature, if you ever get on it, a couple years ago I got on this like 17th century literature kick and I was reading all these classics because they were free on Kindle, whatever. TB, and people used to die of consumption, you know, which meant they were dying like spitting up blood and chunks of, you know, really disgusting mucus. Tuberculosis is a respiratory infection. It is slow growing. There are numerous antibiotic-resistant strains of tuberculosis these days. If you have TB, if someone you know has TB, they need to be on antibiotics immediately. And they need to be on antibiotics long-term to kill every last single TB bacteria in their body. You got TB, you should be on an antibiotic right now. What are you waiting for? Whooping cough. Does anybody here know if they had whooping cough as a kid? Anybody have any family stories about when you had whooping cough? We thought you were going to die. Oh my God, it was terrible. Your father and I drove you to the emergency room at 2 in the morning. All the other kids hanging off the back of the car. No? Okay. You should ask for dramatic stories like that of your childhood. Whooping cough is a bacterial infection. You can be immunized against it. It kills babies very often. Not very often, but it is occasionally fatal in infants. Adults get it. We carry it around. We can walk around with a whooping cough infection for weeks. And it's kind of like this irritating cough that doesn't go away. But there are vaccinations available against whooping cough, and they're important for adults to get because it's the kind of thing that kills babies. We don't like things that kill babies. But it's a bacterial infection. If somebody has whooping cough, they need to be treated with an antibiotic. UTIs, urinary tract infections. It burns when you pee. That requires an antibiotic. And males and females both get UTIs, both bladder infections and kidney infections. Kidney infections are more serious because the bacterial infection has traveled further up the urinary tract. The bladder is sort of the starting point. And if you don't get it treated promptly, those bacteria can continue to climb the little ladder right up to your kidneys. And then you have a slightly bigger problem and a more painful problem. You got a UTI? You should take an antibiotic. You should take an antibiotic immediately. You should kill those bacteria that are making you miserable living in your urinary tract. Antibiotics? Heck yes. Promptly. Give that kid an antibiotic. Give that lady an antibiotic. Give that man an antibiotic. You got a bacterial infection, you should be on an antibiotic. And you should be on the right antibiotic. And we'll talk more about how long you should be on that antibiotic. But yeah, you got a bacterial infection, you need to be on an antibiotic. Bacterial? Antibiotic. Bacterial infection? Antibiotic. I have a bacterial antibiotic. have a bacterial infection, you should be on
Antibiotic.
an antibiotic! Because it kills living things. It kills the bacteria, which are living things which are making you sick. You should be on an antibiotic. Now, let's talk about when you should not be on an antibiotic. And then we'll get to the middle case. Viruses. Oh, viruses. They are not living things. They are not living things. We consider a living thing is capable of reproducing, growing, exchanging nutrients, doing all that stuff. Viruses can't reproduce themselves. They take over your cells, or the cells of a plant, or the cells of an earthworm, or the cells of a blue whale. My tomatoes in my garden right now have a really lovely virus. They have a little bit of mosaic virus, so they're all getting brown and spotty and dying. Viruses aren't killed by antibiotics. So if you have a virus and you take an antibiotic, guess what it's doing for the thing that's making you sick? Zip. Nada. It's doing nothing. So when you have the common cold, that's a virus. That is a virus. It will make you drippy and miserable and stuffy and, you know, kind of dopey and snotty for 5 to 7 days. And you should drink lots of fluids, and you should blow your nose a lot, and you should wash your hands so that you don't share that virus with everybody else around you. And you should probably sleep a little bit extra. Maybe a nice cup of soup, curled up under a blanket, watching really stupid TV reruns. Yeah. Should you take an antibiotic? No! You shouldn't take an antibiotic. You should just eat soup and cuddle up under a blanket. That's what you should do. What about the flu? You can get immunized against the flu. I usually go get my flu shot every year. I can't even read what that last one says. What does it say? Oh, sore throat, yeah. Okay. So, we'll get there. Flu, influenza, the influenza virus. Can influenza kill you? Yes. The 1918 flu epidemic killed lots of people. Actually, oddly enough, did not kill the old and the young, which is the typical case for infectious diseases. It tended to kill young, healthy people, like people in their teens and 20s, which was kind of weird, but that's the way that one worked. So can a virus kill you? Yeah, sure. The way flu kills is really nasty. It fills your lungs up with fluid and you kind of drown in your own tissues. Ew. Yeah. Ugh. Flu stinks. Flu's terrible. You don't want to get the flu. You get the flu, you know what you should do? You should go drink some soup and lay under a fuzzy blanket. Usually 4 to 10 days, depending. Last time I had the flu, I was flat on my back for 4 days, miserable and sweating and nearly delirious and just sipping hot chicken broth. And that's what you should do. Should you take an antibiotic when you have the flu? No! Don't take an antibiotic when you have the flu! Because you're not killing the virus. You're not doing anything about the cause of the problem. And what you are doing is killing off bacteria in your system. And which ones are you killing? The weak ones. Sore throat. So this one, I think it's kind of weird that they include this, because sore throat can have so many causes. It's a symptom, not an illness. But you can have a viral infection of the lining of the throat, and it makes your throat sore. You can also, anybody in here have spring and fall allergies? Mine are the worst in the spring, but I get a little bit of ragweed. And in the spring, I will wake up in March, and my throat is just raw. I think, oh, I'm getting sick. And half the time, by the time I get up and moving around, it's fine. My throat's raw because my sinuses are draining down the back of my throat. Ew. But it's just allergies. It's not even a virus. Should you take an antibiotic because you have a sore throat in the spring?
Yes.
No! Now, should you maybe check in with your pediatrician? You guys are still going to pediatricians, right? Or your general practitioner, whoever your family doctor is, about, hey, why is my throat sore? Yeah, maybe you should. If you have an aunt or a mom or a dad or an uncle or a brother or a sister or a cousin or a neighbor who's a nurse, should you maybe call them and say, hey, my throat's kind of sore. What would you think should be my next step? Yeah, maybe you should. But should you jump to antibiotic? No! No! That was almost a decent horse noise. Okay, now, there are things that can be either bacterial or viral. Bronchitis. If you have asthma, my fellow asthmatics of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your... Bronchitis is an infection of the lungs. You can have viral bronchitis. You can have bacterial bronchitis. If you have bacterial bronchitis, should you take an antibiotic? Yes! I've had bacterial bronchitis. It's really gross. You're coughing up big gobs of yellow stuff. Ew. I know, you had me right before lunch. I'm so sorry. If you have viral bronchitis, should you take an antibiotic? Heck no! That's where talking with your doctor about what it is important. Ear infections. Who here had an ear infection as a kid? Anybody have tubes? Anybody like hardcore? Okay. Whew. Tubes, I think, are not fun. I missed them, and my daughter missed them. Ear infections can be viral or bacterial. Ear infections can be viral or bacterial. How do you know if you want to take an antibiotic? How do you know if you need to? You talk to your doctor. They can actually test the junk in your ears and see if there's bunches of bacteria growing in it. If there is, do you take an antibiotic? Yes! Yes! If it's viral, no. Yeah, someone said yes, but I was yelling about antibiotics. Sinus infections, I get them all the time. This winter I will have multiple sinus infections. I will be walking around like a zombie with snot pouring out of my nose and Kleenex and trying not to spread my germs all over the place. Will I know if those germs are viral or bacterial? I probably won't, because I probably will avoid going to the doctor. I'll probably try to tough it out. And I'll drink lots of tea, and I'll blow my nose a lot, and I'll suck on cough drops, and I'll alcohol my hands frequently. You can have a bacterial sinus infection. You can have a viral sinus infection. Which one should you take an antibiotic for? Bacterial. When you take antibiotics for viral infections, you strengthen all the other bacteria in your body. So, first cause of bacteria coming into contact with antibiotics in the environment and getting made tougher as a species, taking antibiotics when we shouldn't. And we're all guilty of it. That's where we're going to stop for today. Tomorrow, we're going to look at the second cause of antibiotic resistance developing, the second place that those bacteria get exposed. I just knocked something over. And I should tell you that at the very end of this, you're going to actually do a little public service announcement about how to prevent the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So just keep that in mind as we talk about this. Questions, comments, concerns? 9? Okay.